Welcome to the Portland user group. This is the monthly user group, so this is our May version of this. We had some last minute shuffling that we had to do, but I want to thank both Ethan and David, and we'll talk more about them in a moment, but for being here with us and for kind of on a last minute basis agreeing to come and present to us. So appreciate it for both of you. Actually advance. There we go. The way our tugs are usually run is that they're about an hour long. First 5 or 10 minutes, Cynthia and I will talk, do housekeeping activities, and then we switch over to the community spotlight, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then we have I guess we'd call our main presentation, and that would be the rest of the session. So the community spotlight, this is our opportunity in this virtual world to have you meet someone in the community. It's often hard to do that being in a virtual space. Obviously, if we were back in person, that would be different. It's a lot easier to just meet and network with others. But so we have the spot for that purpose. And I'll introduce David here in a second, but a couple more housekeeping topics. We are starting to plan the next few months of meetings. This is monthly. We typically try to do this on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Obviously, I'm speaking to you from Wednesday at 1:30. So sometimes we often don't get that 1 p.m. slot, but we try to keep it consistent. So look for our next few months, June, July, August, September, for those to be around that time slot, and you'll get those calendar invites out. You'll see those sometime 2 or 3 weeks before each of those sessions. There are 6 of us leaders, and each of us plan a session. So this one is kind of a Cynthia, Danny, and I tag teaming this one, but next time it'll be Danny again, and then apparently me, July 21st, and then so on. We obviously there's a Tableau conference next week. We talked quite a bit about this last time, but just throwing this out there again. Tableau conferences next week. It's both virtual and in person. I'm not sure who all is going in person or who is all going virtually, but at least in the virtual, that's something you can sign up for. It's free. It's easy to do. It's just a nice thing to kind of have as a sprinkling into your week, especially some of the bigger sessions. In person, I think there's still spots open. So if you decide last minute that you want to fly to Vegas, I believe that they still have availability there. Danny, who is not here because he is roaming the Italian countryside somewhere. I'm very jealous of him. Last week actually put together this dashboard here. And it looks like you were able to, post that. Yeah, it's now posted in the chat. It's just a little conference session picker that might help you identify some talks to go to. This is for in person only, but just might help identify in a nice fashion, like the category of a talk that you'd want to go to, and then add it to a list. If anything, it's kind of an interesting usage of parameters and lists, and adding and removing items from a list. So there is a blog post that goes along with this that kind of breaks down the logic that's going on inside of there. So if anything, check that part out. Cynthia, do you want to talk about possible in-person?
Yeah, sure. Was just about to send out a link in the chat. We would love to get y'all's opinion on if we should host an in-person event for our next tug or an upcoming tug, and what that looks like to everybody given current state. So we'll send that out and we'll get a feel for how y'all are looking, if everybody's itching to get back, want to do an outdoor thing if it's getting nicer. So yeah, we'll send that out shortly and would love to hear from you guys. So, and then just lastly, we also have a community page. Please keep posting job postings on there. I've seen a few people post on there, and if anybody gets a reference or lands one of those jobs, we'd love to hear one of those success stories on there as well. And also, yeah, I was gonna say there's still 2 positions open at IMDb. Those are still listed from a few months ago on that community page. If you are interested, we are looking. So thank you. I think that's it, Brian.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Cynthia.
Yeah.
And then finally, always have to plug this every time. If you have ideas for content, if you want to present yourself, if you want to be a part of the community spotlight, please just let us know. Our email's there. If you have anything else that, suggestions or anything that you want to send us, please do so. We're always looking for feedback. We're always looking for content, and we'd love to hear from you. So moving on to the community spotlight. As mentioned, this is our way for you to get to know someone in the community. Because we went virtual, our community is not just limited to Portland anymore. We actually have people from all over the country that join us, but more specifically, we have pretty good turnout from the Pacific Northwest in general. Some pretty good turnout from Seattle, and one of those more active members that we've had has been David Ogden, who's from the Seattle area. And so he agreed to come and just talk a little bit about what he does. He works for the Renton School District, and analytics in school districts is actually one of an interest of mine, because I think that there's a lot of interesting data there and a lot of interesting applications. So I'm excited to hear from David, and I'll turn it over to him.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, my name is David Ogden. I work for the Renton School District. I'm one of the, I guess, .edus or .orgs in this Pacific Northwest, this PDX group. I got here. Into the community because at one point there was a Seattle group, and then when the pandemic started, Seattle and Portland joined together. And then the person, and that was in part because the person who was running the Seattle tug moved to Portland, and then nobody took up the Seattle one. And so it was dead for 2 years. So I really enjoyed the Portland ones, and I just kept going. So as the talking heads say, well, how did I get here? And that's, now you know. But you can also, on the right side, you can, that's how long it takes to get from Portland to Renton over there. We are a relatively, well, I guess we call ourselves, I call ourselves a medium-sized school district. When you look at the United States, the Northwest school districts are pretty small in general compared to some of the other ones we have in New York State or Illinois, Chicago. We're about 15,000 students with 4 high schools, 4 middle and 15 elementary. You can learn more about the Renton School District here at our .us part, our .us website. But Renton has been interested in improving our data literacy in our district, and we're like using Tableau for that, similar to what Tableau says in its early days, and still says, is we want to bring data closer to our decision makers, and we want it in a format that they can use. So we're hoping to drive some curiosity with the dashboards that we build, as well as make them easily consumable. When we started working with Tableau, we were not as data literate as a district, so we started to bring out what we call our core beliefs for our district. My boss and I just kind of made these up, and we just continue to use them every time we meet with our users or our audience, whether they be families or teachers or district administrators. And we always end with the last one. It's like, unless you're going to do something with the data, you're not going to have much of an impact. It may change, but it won't be necessarily because of you. We have been Tableau users. There's just a quick screenshot of our license registrations. We actually started in 9.3. For those of you, shout out to the old before they went to the year groups, and we started, and we just continue to update. We have a server, and here's what our story looks like. So I was just asked to talk about our school district's journey with Tableau. And we started with 3-ring binders. That's how we would share our slides and data with our administrators and with our teachers. And we do that really literally once a year. We have a student information system that holds a lot of data, but it wasn't always that user friendly. And people are like, I'm not sure I need it, except to enter their grades. But when Tableau came around, or we learned about Tableau, we started slow, and then we just really bought in. So now all of our certificated staff, all of our administrators have access to Tableau dashboards that we make specific, some for everybody at one place, some for everybody at another place. We use their role level security through our Active Directory to make sure, and as well as groups, to make sure students, our teachers are only seeing the data for their particular students. And it's really been helpful to increase people's use of data in our district. Now, some people still don't use it very frequently as much as we'd like, but it's better than it used to be. Our student information system called Skyward looks like what it is on the left of your screen. Not particularly sexy, and sometimes difficult to get all the information in that column on the far left, and you have to click through each page to see more. So with Tableau, we're able to make a more visual look of the same information. So this is actually the very same student on the left as it on the right, and try to make it more intriguing, more visual, to many more things we can do with Tableau. We simply take data from reports that we get in our student information system. We don't use data director or the data control thing. We are a school district, so we don't have all the money that other people have. And so since everything we really need is in here, we simply export the files to a server, and that's where Tableau server comes and picks them up every night, somewhere between 11 o'clock and 4 a.m. Unfortunately, we aren't able to, in our student information system, to export the individual assignments or grades. That would be really good. We use Canvas as an example, and their Canvas grades push out to our student information system. And what we're trying to do then is we will get more knowledge about APIs, because those are available, I think, both for our student information system and for a lot of different things, but we haven't decided to go to a data lake or cube or warehouse or that sort of thing. So the files get together here, and we use all that to make fancy dashboards. This is the same dashboard you saw at the beginning, but this is specific to a school, and it allowed us, particularly during the pandemic, to narrow down to see where students were that had poor attendance. So on the right side there, you can see a particular neighborhood for this high school and break it down to which buildings had students with more chronic absences. And you can see even within that one building, so it's a big apartment building that had 33 students in it. You can see within that apartment building, some students had higher attendance than others, which allowed us to kind of find friends or others who might know more about the situation and try to help those students during the pandemic. We have changed our style over the time. On the left is the earlier version of an attendance dashboard, and on the right is the current version. So we've done things like add click filters to show and hide a lot of our demographics. We changed it up to date, so you can look at our attendance from a full year to a certain date, past 30 days, past 2 weeks. Most of these were requests from our principals, like, hey, I'd like to see it this amount of time, that amount of time. And the thing we did here too is, and when you click on any one of these bars, it'll bring up the actual names of the students in that particular column, or that particular part of the bar. So over time, we've grown. We still have plenty to learn, and we're really excited to continue to use Tableau and learn new things. And the Tableau user groups are a great way to do that. I watch a lot of the videos on YouTube. I am more of the Tableau director rather than the Tableau creator, but I've gotten better and better, and I have my own public profile of what I am willing to share of the things that I've made. But I really do appreciate this opportunity to participate with you, and we'll continue to listen. Looking forward to Ethan's presentation on different layers.
Thank you, David. And speaking of your public profile, if you scroll up in the chat, you'll see a map that he had made that includes all of the pastries and donut places in Seattle. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but it's generated a lot of chat so far.
That's Padlet, not Tableau. But there are a lot of data visualization software out there.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. You're doing data stuff, so it doesn't matter what's in. Yeah. Thank you. I really enjoyed seeing the full journey from 3-ring binders with data stuffed into it all the way to Tableau. So appreciate you sharing your story with us. If anybody wants to reach out to David, are you okay with people connecting with you on LinkedIn or something like that? And if you want to post that into the chat,
I'll just drop my email in here as well.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, reach out to David and connect with him. I think that's the point of all this, is that to connect us all a little bit more. I'm going to share my screen one more time, just quickly.
And I'll repost those links again. What I can do is, Vanessa, on that community page, I can put a lot of the links that we have in here there. So then it's persistent somewhere outside of this Zoom chat too. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry,
follow email also is a good place. Yeah.
Oh, word. Yeah.
Yeah. The next part of our tug is we have Ethan Lang from Playfair Data joining us. Again, Ethan joined us on a kind of a last minute request, so I really appreciate you joining us. Ethan is an associate director of analytics engineering there at Playfair, and he is coming to speak with us on a interesting, I don't know if you would call this a framework, but in my head, it's a framework for how to think about developing dashboards in particular. And so the idea is if this framework will help you in how to better conceptualize all the steps in building a dashboard. So we thought this would be a really good topic to provide to everyone at the Portland Tug. And Ethan and I had just realized pretty recently that we both went to the same university. We went to the University of Kansas. I don't know if anybody knew that about me, but I'm originally from Kansas. I think we had different degrees, but yeah, I love that connection there. So with that, I'll hand this over to Ethan.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, let me stop.
All right. Is everybody seeing that?
Yep.
Fantastic. Well, first, I just want to say thank you to Ryan and Cynthia for the invite. I've been wanting to speak here for a while, so I'm super pumped to be here and grateful for the opportunity. So thanks again. I also want to thank the audience as well. I know your time is very valuable, so we really appreciate you joining us today to hear what David and I had to say, and also what Ryan and Cynthia had to present to us earlier. So thank you again. Hopefully you can get some value out of it and apply it to your everyday. So a little bit about me before we jump into the topic. I'll be brief here. Again, my name is Ethan Lang. I'm the Associate Director of Analytics Engineering at Playfair Data. I'm also the co-lead of the Veterans Advocacy Tableau user group. So myself, I am a veteran. I served in the US Army for a while. So part of that, I want to give back to the veteran community. So through our tug, we kind of use Tableau as a platform to bring awareness to veteran-related issues, things like suicide or homelessness. We use Tableau to kind of visualize that and bring awareness to those subjects. I'm also a member of the Tableau Speaker Bureau. I feel like this is a little program that kind of goes swept under the rug, but it's really just a fancy way to say that I'm on some list that Tableau has. They can call upon me to speak at events like a Tableau user group or speak at a conference, speak to their clients if they're trying to sell in something. They can call onto me as a user of their product to speak to their clients. So happy to be a part of that as well. I did have the opportunity to speak at the 2020 conference, so that was pretty cool. It's the first virtual one, so it's quite the experience. All right, well, enough about me. You guys didn't hear or come here today to hear about myself. So let's jump into the topic. What I want to present to you, Ryan did a good job of explaining it as a framework. It's really an idea called the 6 components of layered graphics. And Tableau's kind of adopted this idea and they've built their tool around this idea. So we kind of implement this every day without even really noticing. So what are those 6 components? Well, the first layer of these components is the data layer. And if you're thinking about Tableau as a software, when you open it up, the first thing it asks you to do is connect the data. And Tableau does a great job of doing that. There's tons of data connections built within Tableau. So they really do a good job of allowing us to connect through this data layer. The next layer in this process of 6 is the mark type. So once you choose or connect to your data, the next thing you're going to do is choose your chart type or how you want to encode the marks on your view. So if we're thinking, again, back to Tableau, we make our data connection, we jump into a sheet, we drag some measures and dimensions into the view, and we create a chart type. This can be a line chart or a bar chart. Tableau does a really good job of guiding the user through that as well. The next layer is aesthetics. So once we have our chart type and we've encoded the marks on our view, we want to start bringing in some aesthetics. And this is where we really start to drive context for the user, right? So we're applying color, maybe shape or size. We're using those pre-attentive attributes to drive attention to detail on specific things within the data. The next layer, I got ahead of myself there. The next layer is filtering. So there's many different filters within Tableau, and I'll touch on some of those today. So we'll get into the order of operations that Tableau runs in the back end, but this is where they start running through those filters. And adding filters or subplots into your view is a great way to allow the user, again, the whole idea is to add context and generate some value for the user. Allowing them to chop the data up and explore the view is going to bring a lot of value. The 5th layer is statistics. So at this layer, this is where we can really start to apply some advanced analytics. And again, Tableau makes this so easy for us, right? Within the analytics pane, we can simply drag in very advanced analytics, things like forecasts or clustering techniques, regression lines, things like that into our view. So they make it very easy for us to apply some of these statistics within our view. And then to top that all off, once we've kind of created this unique data visualization, we really want to put a theme around that. And what that means is we're going to start bringing in some design elements. Maybe it's a logo, headers, simple, some drop shadow effects, something that kind of brings it to life and gives that professional polish on top of what you've built. And this is really going to drive adoption of your tool. And we'll go over that when we get into that layer in more detail. So before I get into that stuff in more detail, I do want to touch a little bit on the history behind the idea. So I have to admit, I didn't come up with this. A lot of really smart people have put this idea together, and I've just done some research on it and kind of figured out, how it's being used and implemented within Tableau. And that's what this presentation is all about. But to go into a little bit of history, the most recent kind of publication that I found with this idea in it is from a famous library that was published by an author named Hadley Wickham. And I say library because this is a famous one. If you guys are familiar with R code at all, R is a coding language that is used a lot when we're doing statistical analysis. But this ggplot2 is a library that you can download in R. And what it does is it allows us to visualize data using R code. And it relies heavily on this layering graphics technique. So when we download it in R and we start visualizing it using code, we have to manually tell, through code, this is the data I want to connect to. This is the mark type that I've chosen. It's all very manual, and it's very linear as well with this process. So this is the most recent publication I found, but Hadley Wickham actually picked up this idea from another author named Leland Wilkinson, who published a book called The Grammar of Graphics. And you can see that Hadley Wickham kind of tips his hat to this other author. He named that library ggplot2 after this book. So that actually stands for the Grammar of Graphics Plotting version 2 is the library. So he kind of, gives Leland that credit as well. But this whole idea of layering graphics goes back decades. The most early publication I could find was published in the early 80s, but really it goes all the way back to when we first started using computers to visualize data. This was the approach and the way that we kind of developed, and we've just kind of built on it over time. What I find fascinating is that Tableau has kind of perfected this process and allowed us to do this process in a very easy way. It's very streamlined to go through the entire layering graphics approach. So let's dive into these layers in a little bit more detail. So I'll start with the data layer. And at the data layer, this is pretty self-explanatory, but there are some core concepts here that I want to touch on to make sure the audience understands these things. The first one is the idea between structured data and unstructured data. So if we're talking unstructured data, anyone that's opened any kind of Excel sheet in a business setting is probably familiar with something that looks like this. We have dates across the top going left to right. We have our measures, maybe some dimensions, all stacked up in one column. We have columns that are being used as dividers that literally have no data encoded in it. This is very, very common that we would see. And it's very natural for us as humans, right? Like typically, at least in our culture here in the United States, we like to read things left to right. So obviously, if we're encoding data manually to be consumed, that's probably how we would encode it, which is what we see a lot. However, a computer wants a more structured data source, which would look something similar to this on the right. And this is where we're going to kind of pivot all of that data that we kind of previewed in the unstructured data set there. We're going to pivot that and get our dates in one column. We're going to have our measures in a column. So we'll have a column for sales. We would have a column for cost of goods, profit, and so on. And this is how we would load our data into a tool like Tableau or even tools like R. And this is typically called like a tidy format. You'll hear it called tidy or structured data. And this is kind of an example of that. Now, I put together kind of 3 rules of thumb if we're talking structured data. The first rule of thumb is that every variable is going to be unique. So we would have, in our example here, I have name, age, and gender as my columns. And those are going to be unique columns. I wouldn't have two columns for name unless I have first name and last name. Maybe that's a special case. The second rule of thumb is that every row would be a unique observation. So again, here in my example, I have four rows. I have Anna, Mark, Max, and Carol. I wouldn't want to encode Anna in there. We would then be duplicating the data, and we would run into issues with that later on, which kind of breaks our structured format. The idea is if I have to clean the data once it's structured, it's not structured. So we really want those unique observations in the data. The third rule of thumb is that every value is going to be filled in with some sort of unique data type. So for instance, I don't want any nulls or any NAs within my data. A lot of times, once we start getting into some of those deeper layers within this framework, if we're talking statistics, I don't want any of those nulls or NA within my data because a lot of times I'm either going to rip those out before I apply the statistical models, or I'll have to fill them in with some sort of data. Again, it goes back to that idea of cleaning it. If I have to clean it, it's probably not good enough to be called a structured data set. So there's different programs that you can use to structure your data from an unstructured to structured. Tools like Alteryx or Tableau Prep, very common that I've seen throughout the industry. Also tools like R or Python or SQL. You can use these coding languages to kind of structure your data from that unstructured format into a more structured format. The next kind of core concept is the idea between measures and dimensions and how they're related. So a measure is typically defined as a numeric quantitative value that can be measured. These would be things like sales or some sort of aggregation, like the sum of sales. Then we have things called dimensions. Dimensions are qualitative fields that will describe your measures. So things like date or location, customer name, order ID. All of those would be dimensions within your data. How these things are related is you would really use your dimensions to describe your measures, just like I described earlier. So if I brought in sales into my view and I saw that I had $2 million in sales, I might be feeling really good about that. But let's say I brought date into that same view, and now I see I made $1.5 million last year, and this year I've only made $500,000 in sales. I might not be feeling pretty good about that. So that's how they're related and how you would kind of use them in tandem. So that's the kind of second core concept of the data layer that I wanted to touch on. At this view, I did want to bring this in as we kind of go in through each of these layers. I've built out a Tableau workbook where you can toggle these layers on and off. So you can see here in this view, I've toggled on that first layer at the bottom right. So we'll see that come on. And right now I've just connected the data. So I literally have nothing in my view. I've just made the data connection. And as we go through the presentation, I'll be building this view as we go and toggling each of those layers on. So the second layer is mark type and choosing your mark type. And when I say mark type, I really mean what kind of chart type do you want to use to visualize your data? Are you going to visualize it with a line chart, or maybe a bar chart would be better? So at this layer, that's where you're kind of making that decision. Again, Tableau does a great job of guiding us through this. So within Tableau, if you're choosing a mark type, you can do something as simple as drag in measures and dimensions into the view, and it will automatically choose a mark type for you based on those measures and dimensions. If you wanted to choose your own mark type, there's a few ways you can do it. So from your marks card, you can select that drop down, and you can literally change how you want to encode the marks on your view from this drop down. So you can go from a line chart to a bar chart to an area, maybe choose square or circle. All of that's very easily and readily available within this drop down. The third way that Tableau kind of walks us through this layer is from the Show Me tab. So we're all familiar with that. Once we drag in some measures and dimensions onto the view, you can simply click Show Me. It will show you all of the chart types that Tableau's done research on that would best describe that data within the view. So that's another easy way to encode your marks. But we all know that Tableau is a very flexible and robust tool as well. So you're not just limited to those mark types that's built within Tableau to choose from. There's a lot of great resources out there, and really it's almost limitless what you can build in Tableau as far as chart types go. One good resource that I absolutely love is from Kevin Flairledge. So he's posted this on Tableau Public, but it's called the Tableau Chart Catalog. There's 100 chart types in here. From 74 different authors. But what I love about this is you can come here and kind of scroll through it for inspiration. And if there's a chart type that's interested or that you're interested in, say I wanted to learn to build this arc diagram, I can simply click on this view from this Tableau workbook. It's going to take me to that new workbook where this author has implemented that arc diagram. And now I can download that workbook and try to re-engineer what that author did. Maybe it takes a special data structure to get that chart type. I would be able to view that data structure from that workbook that I've downloaded. I can also see how he's like encoded the view or you know, which measures and dimensions and how he's using them into relation of one another to get this chart type to work. So that's another great thing to kind of go through if you're looking for inspiration or you're just trying to upskill or maybe add a new chart type to your toolkit. This is a great resource to do that. But Kevin also, he kind of gives credit to some of these other authors. One of the most famous ones is from Andy Kriebel, the visual vocabulary. Andy takes a different approach. So rather than looking at chart types and kind of defining it based on the visual and choosing that as your use case, Andy's built a tool called the visual vocabulary that will walk you through where you decide the use case first and then go into his tool and it will tell you which chart types best are used for that use case. So let's say I wanted to visualize correlation. Within Andy's view or his workbook, there would be an option for correlation. You would click that and it would dive into what graphs or what chart types would best be used to describe correlation and visualize it. So another great resource out there. All right, so I've turned on my second layer here in the view so we can see my data kind of come to life. I've chosen a line chart. to visualize the close price by day of a particular stock. So we can see from January 1 to January 1, we have 365 days here, and we can see how that stock has changed through each of those days. So the third layer is aesthetics. And as an analyst, this is where you can really start to show your chops. You know, like I said, Tableau makes it really easy to connect to the tool, connect to data, build a mark type or choose a chart type. Tableau will almost build it for you. So really anybody can open up Tableau for the first time and start building some of these line charts and bar charts. It's very intuitive, but it really takes some finesse and skill to master aesthetics, in my opinion. So as an analyst or a Tableau engineer or developer, this is really where you can start to dial in and show and bring value to your view. So I'll touch on some of these aesthetics. For one, I'll touch on color, which in my opinion is one of the most powerful aesthetics that you can incorporate within your tool. If you're really trying to draw your audience attention to specific marks in the view, color is a great way to do that. For instance, if I grayed everything out and I made a big red mark within the view, the audience is going to be driven to that specific mark right off the bat. So they're going to see that that one's differentiated from the others. So color is a great way or a great aesthetic to start adding in some of those alerts to the user and insight. The next is shape, and just like color is another great aesthetic to kind of draw attention to. Also within Tableau, you know, you have the ability to load in custom shapes. So within your Tableau repository, you can load in those custom shapes, and now you have access to those directly from within the tool. So as you're developing your product, you can work in things like toggle buttons, or maybe some other aesthetics that you can incorporate that would drive the theme once we get up to that layer. So shape is another great aesthetic that you can use in Tableau. Next is size. So again, size is great, especially if it's in tandem with things like color or shape. You know, if you colored something a different color and sized it differently from all the other marks, it's really going to drive someone's attention to that view and that insight. So it's another great aesthetic you can incorporate. My only complaint with size is you just have that slider to adjust the size, which is probably the worst thing to do, especially if you're working with like multiple sheets and you're trying to size it all the same. You just have like that, you know, midpoint as your reference, and then you kind of have to eyeball it from there. So it's my only complaint on size. Next, and it's often overlooked as an aesthetic, but your axes, right? So within your axes, you can encode, you can actually right click on any axes within your view. There'll be an option that says edit axes. And from there, you'll see this dialog menu pop up. You can change the range of your axes. You can change the number of tick marks if you're trying to reduce that data to ink ratio. This is a great aesthetic to kind of dive in and drill in and do that with. You can reverse the scale. So here in the middle, just below range, you can reverse scale by just selecting that check mark. Using that is another great way to kind of build in some different chart types, you know, just reversing the scale of a bar chart. So 0 would be on the top. It kind of gives it a different view or a different use case. So that's another great aesthetic you can incorporate. There's also, you can change the scale and put it to a logarithmic scale by simply just check marking this box. So if you're looking to normalize your data for whatever reason, this is another great and easy way to do that. Last is the titles. So within here, you can just add a slight context, you know, keeping it very minimal. Adding a slight title or subtitle to your axes is a great way to, again, drive that context to the end user. The last four I'll just touch on briefly because I feel like as developers and analysts, we use these quite often. Labels, pretty self-explanatory. If you want to label the marks on your view, you would drag that measure or dimension onto labels and it will add that. One key point I want to add with label though, if you click on that within the marks card, you have the ability to change things like maybe you don't want to add 365 labels to your view. Maybe you just want to do the min and max. If you click on label within the marks card, you would have the ability to change those options. So that's a great technique to apply. The next is the detail marks card. So if you were to add anything to details, it's going to change the level of detail of your view. So for instance, if I had a scatter plot and I added customer name to detail, now it's going to encode all the marks on my view to that level of detail, the customer name level of detail, versus maybe just one mark in the view. It'll have every customer within the data set in the view. Next is the tooltip. And tooltip is another great way, one technique and tip that I would definitely recommend. I actually picked this up from another talk it was actually the Veterans Advocacy Tableau user group. We had Dawn Harrington speak, and she gave the tip of, if you're encoding tooltips within your view, never go with that default, where it just says sales, colon, whatever it is. You want to really make sure that the user has like a sentence to read. So delete all that stuff. Don't go with the default. Encode it to where it makes sense to the user. So instead of just sales and a number, maybe say something like on X day, whatever date is in the view or that mark, we made X sales. So that's just a great way to kind of add in that insight and kind of drive context to the user and provide value. Last is angle, and angle is typically referred to with pie charts. Not trying to sell you on building pie charts in this talk, but when you start talking about angles and stuff like that, you can really start getting into some more advanced chart types. So that's really where I want to spend time on this one. Once you start encoding angles to things, you can do things like add a radial bar chart, or add some sort of sine and cosine to change the way the line is shaped. All of those things would be applied with this angle marks card. So another great way to kind of dive into some of those more advanced chart types that we talked about earlier. So you can see here my third layer, I've toggled it on. I've added color, some labels to my axes, and we can kind of see it come to life a little more. So the green means that the close price was higher than the prior day. If it's red, it's lower than the prior day. Layer 4 is filtering. And as I mentioned earlier in Tableau, there's actually several different filters, and they're all processed at different times. So here to the left, I have the order of operations. And the first two filters that I'll cover on is the extract filter and the data source filter. So these would be processed first. And when we talk about these two filters, really, if you go to your data source tab within Tableau, you would see a view very similar to the one I have here on the right. You can see at the top right of that view, at connection, my connection is checked on live. So if I were to add a filter to a live connection, which you can do so from the right of that, you'll see filters, and then there's an add in blue font. If you click add, you can add a context, or an extract or data source filter. So if I'm working with a live connection, that would be a data source filter. If I'm working on an extract connection, that would be an extract filter. They're the first thing that Tableau processes. And the best way I can describe, or the best use case for these, say I have a data set with 500 million rows. It's a pretty large data set. Loading that much data and applying logic to it, especially if we have some more advanced calculations once we dive into the dashboard, if you add a dashboard or extract filter, or a data source or extract filter, it's going to process that filter the very first. That's the very first thing it processes before any kind of calculations are processed. This would be processed first. So it's going to limit that 500 million to maybe something a little bit more tangible. Maybe it's adding, filtering it down to 1 million rows. So it's going to drive speed and speed optimization of your tools by adding in filters at this level on the order of operations. The next filter I'll cover on is called a context filter. And if you look at the view I have on the right here, we have two things in the filter shelf. I have category and subcategory. And we can see that category has a gray pill. So when we add things to the view, those are called pills. So category is a gray pill. That denotes that it's a context filter. And a context filter is actually processed before any of the other filters. And the way that I would best describe this as a use case, say I wanted some sort of cascading effect with my filters. So for instance, if I wanted to filter my subcategories to the categories that I have filtered, I would add category to context. It's going to process that first. So when I go to filter my subcategory, which is a dimension filter, we'll touch on that here in a moment. When I go to filter the subcategories, that listing will be filtered down to whatever category I have filtered on in the context filter. So you kind of get this cascading effect down to your kind of dimension filters from there. All right, so the next three I'll touch on all at the same time because they're all related. Condition filters, top-end filters, and dimension filters. If we go back to the last slide, again, subcategory is denoted with a blue pill, which is a dimension filter in the filter shelf. So there's three different types of dimension filters, if you want to call them that. If you add a dimension to your filter shelf, you'll be presented with one of these views to the right. So we can see there's 4 tabs on that dialog box. We have general, wildcard, condition, and top. If I go to the condition tab and apply a condition filter, it's a condition filter. If I go to the top tab and I apply a top-in filter, obviously it's a top-in filter. Those are processed before a dimension filter. So going back to our cascading effect, there would be some cascading going on here as well. A dimension filter is applied through the general tab. So if you go to general, it's just applied like normal. You know, check your boxes, and then those dimensions will be filtered on the view. The next filter is a measures filter. So again, I have our view to the right. We can see my context filter with category, my dimension filter with subcategory, and now we have a green pill, which denotes a measure. I've added a measure filter to the filter shelf. So you can see now I'm filtering down to a minimum sales. So what I applied here in a use case that kind of brings it all to life, I've applied a filter, a measure filter, that is going to filter the view to only records that had more than $10 in sales. So anything less than $10 is being filtered out of the view currently. So that's kind of how you would add in a measures filter. The last kind of filter is a table calculation filter. It's denoted very similar to a measure filter, except now it has that delta symbol to the right-hand side. So we can see we have that little triangle that denotes a table calculation. And the way this one would be applied is very similar to your measures filter. So if we added a table calculation filter, say I was looking at the percent total of everything on the view, I could filter out certain percentages within a range. So that's, again, another use case of how that would be applied on the view. But really filtering, now that we've kind of talked through all of these, adding in these filters is going to be a great way to allow the user to explore the data themselves, which really provides value for you as a developer within Tableau. You know, we don't want to publish a view for every type or need that the user may have. So we want to give them these options to kind of comb through the data themselves by applying these filters. So that's the benefit to you and to the user themselves. The last part of this layer is called subplotting, and I'll briefly touch on this because it's pretty self-explanatory. But really, this is where you would want to build in within your dashboard kind of a side-by-side comparison of something within your view. So the user has the ability to kind of look at both simultaneously and make a decision. So as an example, what I have here, I've added a filter to our view that I've been previewing throughout this. And I've filtered the left-hand side to stock A and the right-hand side to stock B. Now the user has the ability to look through those different stocks at the same time and make a decision. So if we were looking at buying stock A, we can see that it's kind of on the downward spiral. So maybe we want to hold off until that kind of hits a low and starts coming back up to make the buy. Or maybe we want to buy it now in hopes that it's going to start upticking soon. On the reverse of that, you have stock B, which is on the uptick. So maybe we either want to buy it now in hopes that it's going to continue to go up, or hold off until it kind of peaks and plateaus and starts coming down before we make the purchase. So the user can start coming together and kind of making those decisions, just looking at this data side by side. Makes it very helpful for them. So we can see the fourth layer, I've toggled that on. So I've added a filter to my view, and now we can see that all of the users now have the ability to kind of filter through this layer, or those different stocks, excuse me. The fifth layer is statistics. Within the statistics layer, you can start to apply some very advanced analytics techniques. So if we're familiar with the data pane, which looking at this would be that data part at the very top, this is where we would see our measures and dimensions listed. If we go up to that and click on analytics, which is to the right of data, this opens up the analytics pane, and we'll be presented with these options. So we can see there's kind of three sections. There's summarize, model, and custom. And within each of these sections, we can then add in some of these unique advanced analytics tools to kind of drill in and provide some additional context for the user, or maybe even apply some sort of predictive modeling that the user can analyze. So I'll go through some of these that I use quite often. The first ones I'll touch on is the average line and average line with a 95% confidence interval. If we add those to the view, we can see we'll be presented with this distribution band. And this would allow us to add it on a specific level of detail. So if I wanted to add that average line on the entire table, I can do that, or a pane or individual cells. I have the ability to do that right here. I can also add that line from a column or row perspective, or both. A good use case with this one would be like a scatter plot. So if I added an average line to both column and rows to a scatter plot, now we have a quadrant where we can start analyzing those different quadrants and seeing maybe, why are my customers in this lower left quadrant? How do we get them to that upper right quadrant and get them into be maybe more profitable or generate more sales? So you can start doing some analysis like that just by adding some of these reference lines. Another great one to incorporate is the median with 95% confidence. Again, you could go back to that same use case, but where I really use median often is in tandem with an average line. So if we're thinking of outliers in our data set, if our data set is absolutely normalized, meaning it follows kind of that bell-shaped curve, the average, median, and mean are all, or excuse me, the mode, mean, and median are all going to equal 0 if they're perfectly normalized. If we have some outliers, or if our data is skewed to the left or right for whatever reason, if we add an average line and a median line, we'll be able to kind of sense that right off the bat. If we have some pretty large outliers, our median and average are going to be pretty far apart. So this is just a great way to add in context, or maybe to do a little bit of analysis yourself as an analyst to kind of see how your data is structured. The next one is adding a trend line. So we can see there's 5 different types of trend lines that you can add. And really, I love this, that Tableau kind of visualizes these because they allow even a user that's not familiar with statistics and what goes on in the background, they kind of show you different use cases and different shapes of data that would best fit each of these trend lines. So if we wanted to add a linear trend line, we can see our data should probably follow kind of a linear path, maybe from that bottom left up to the upper right. So that kind of drives the user, even from a non-statistical perspective, on which would be best fit. Now, another thing I love about this is once you add that, Tableau's incorporated very easy ways to analyze some of those summary statistics that happen within the background by adding some of these models. So you can right click on the line, you can view things like the p-value, you can view your coefficients and things like that. So now you can start really getting into some more advanced things and really start to drive some insight based on your data very easily with Tableau. Next model is forecasting. And within this forecasting, Tableau uses a model called exponential smoothing for their forecasting model. And it's a pretty advanced forecast. What I love about it is if you add forecast to your view and say there's just not enough data to get an accurate forecast, what Tableau will do is add an average line with some bands around it with a 95% confidence interval. So you can see, it's just visually telling you we don't really have enough data to calculate it. So it's probably just going to follow the average. Maybe that's an alert to you, even again, from that non-statistical perspective. Maybe it's just an alert to say, okay, maybe I should dive into a little bit more level of detail within the data. So maybe instead of using year, maybe I need to use month. Then maybe I'll have enough data points to build out that model or that forecast. Maybe I need to drill down the week to really pick up on those seasonality and trends that kind of take place underneath the hood of this model. So again, from a non-statistical perspective, this is another great model that you can incorporate within your tool. The last one is cluster, and the model that Tableau uses underneath the hood for clustering is called K-means, and it's a great model to use. What I love about clustering within Tableau, if you right click on it, you have the ability to choose how many clusters you want displayed in the view. So maybe you're trying to decide the best way to market to specific customers within your data. So you would kind of find some data points, you would drag in this clustering, and you can build out the clusters yourself from there and kind of build in that context and do a little bit more deeper analysis on that data. Lastly, within statistics as far as Tableau, if you're not satisfied with the modeling that they've built, they allow you to very easily connect to external data sources like R or Python to incorporate some more advanced analytics and advanced statistics within your tool. I took this screenshot from a prior version. I think it's slightly different now, but it really follows the same steps here. If you click on Help, the very top navigation, you go to Settings and Performance, you should find an option called Manage Analytics Extension Connection. From there, you can connect to an R server or some sort of Python, like PyTab, and incorporate those data points, or excuse me, that code within Tableau. So now you can actually code R within Tableau, and Tableau will pass that data off to R will process it and pass it back. What is great about this is now you have the ability to pass something into R and it's going to return different values. So as a use case, let's say I was doing some sort of regression. I have the ability now to pass that data into R. It's going to process it and return my coefficients. So now I can take my coefficients as an actual data point within Tableau and incorporate it within my analysis. So you can start doing some very powerful things when you incorporate these external connections. All right, I'm going to go quickly. I know we're bumping up against time here, but I've toggled on that fifth layer, and we can see I've toggled on a trend line and some forecasting within my view here. The last layer is theme, and theme for me, I feel like Tableau does all those other layers extremely well, but fails with the theme. So when it comes to theme, what I mean by theme is building in some sort of architecture around your dashboard that's going to drive adoption and provide that professional polish. Theme would be things like, round edges around your containers, some drop shadowing effect to kind of add in some depth to what's being built around your tool. All of those things Tableau doesn't really do well natively. So we have to kind of look to other tools to incorporate that stuff. Some tools I would recommend and that I use are things like Figma or Adobe XD. So Figma is a free tool. I use it quite often. Anyone can go there and create an account and start building out some design elements that you can incorporate within your tool. Adobe XD is a paid service, so you have to buy into Adobe's Creative Suite to get access to this tool. But with that, it also comes with some other tools like Photoshop that you can start incorporating that kind of drive out some more new capabilities that Figma necessarily wouldn't have. So both great options. If you can get your organization to buy into something like Adobe Creative Suite, it's worth the investment. Otherwise, Figma is a fantastic tool and very easy and intuitive to use, even from someone that's maybe not very graphic design kind of person. I would consider myself more of a numbers guy than a design guy, but I get around in Figma. It's a pretty nice tool. So to bring it all to life and kind of show you what the theme is, I incorporated a theme. So I've toggled on that last layer within my view here. So we can see it applies an architecture around the entire view. I kind of have this framing with some shadowing effect, some rounded corners. It just kind of gives that, professional polish on the view. I've added things like headers and labels throughout the entire dashboard so we can kind of see those elements come to life. All of that stuff is incorporated within the theme or the design of the dashboard itself. So we can see all that kind of come to life. So I'll briefly touch on this. Let me exit out of this real quick and jump in over here. But I created this in my Tableau public portfolio. It's the layered graphics workbook. But from here, you can toggle on and off these different layers. So you can see how they're all connected. So for instance, if I toggle off aesthetics, we can see that if I do that, I also lose some of my statistics. Forecasting within Tableau is built using a color aesthetic. So if I turn off the color aesthetic, I lose that capability. So you can kind of see how they're all kind of related to one another and how they all kind of play with one another. They also all have their importance. So you can see if I toggle off my theme, we really lose that professional polish that I've incorporated within the tool. Now we're just kind of left with a static line chart. Not necessarily a bad thing if you're using this tool for your own analysis, but if this is going to a C-suite, I'd much rather present them with something that has these design elements or theme built around it than just a static line chart. It's just going to make it more professional. It's going to provide that adoption and really drive adoption of your tool within the organization. Let me hop back over here and just close out quickly. Oh man, let me start from the right slide. And I'll just go through this pretty quick. Some other resources to upskill yourself. Tableau Public is a great one. What I love about it is also it's like the world's largest data repository, if you want to think of it like that. You can look up any kind of thing in Tableau Public and you're going to find something. So for instance, if I were to look up comic books, I'm going to find workbooks that have some comic book data. And from there, I can download the workbook. Maybe I want to reach out to that author, make sure it's okay with them if I go republish that somewhere. But again, Tableau community is just so welcoming and helpful. I haven't seen anyone that's run into an issue like that. If they didn't want you downloading the workbook and using that, they'd probably disable that option within their Tableau Public portfolio. So great tool to use. Some other resources that we have at Playfair. We obviously offer flagship trainings. We do that virtually now, so we have that option. Definitely check our website out. We have some virtual training events coming up. Our blog is free. We post a new blog almost every week, if not more than that. So definitely check our blog out. If you're running into an issue, I guarantee we've run into that same issue and blogged about it. So definitely check it out. If you're running into problems, we can probably help you out there. Playfair Data TV is a subscription service, but there's over 25 plus hours of recorded video content that walks you through different chart types, different tactics, both tactically and strategically within data. So some really great stuff in there. And we're also a consulting firm. So if you guys want to work with us, definitely feel free to reach out to me or through our website, and we'll be in touch and see if that's a good fit for both parties. I think that's all I wanted to present today. So I'll open it up to questions, and I'll also just leave my contact information up here. So there's my email address, my Twitter, and if you guys want to follow me on LinkedIn, it's the LinkedIn domain, and it's Ethan-Lang is where you would find me. Was there any questions?
Thank you, Ethan. Yeah, and we had a comment there that we've gone over, but there are people sticking around for this question section, so we could just go on for a few more minutes. Appreciate the presentation. It's a really great framework for thinking about all the components that go into a dashboard. It's often overwhelming as a developer because there are so many things that you have to think about, all the way from the data side of things to building the visualization component of it. It's not just about making a chart, but there's a lot more that goes into that, right? So I like this framework for breaking that down. But also, your presentation nicely goes from higher conceptual thoughts into actual detailed, details in Tableau that provide takeaways for us on how to do something like edit and access, for example. There were a couple questions. One, this is back when you were talking about the data, so the first layer here. Can you say more about why having missing data or i.e. null values dilutes the structure of the data? In other words, when does nothing tell you something or not?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Actually, sometimes it's a good thing. We had an engagement very recently where instead of visualizing some data, they wanted to visualize the gaps in the data. So that was a really interesting use case that I've never run across before. So there is some value in having nulls occasionally. But really, when we're talking like a structured data source, you would typically find an actual structured source published to some sort of server where there's some sort of ETL process happening that's bringing all that data in, structuring it to a table that the end users can then attach to or connect to apply to their work. So if we're talking at that level, probably don't want to have nulls or NA values within that. There's most likely something wrong with the data connection or collection, or maybe even something wrong within our ETL process that's causing that. So again, data strains, there's definitely going to be a use case for everything, but most often than not, you don't want to have those nulls or NA values within a structured data set.
And in general, Tableau doesn't do good with just making up data. And so, for example, I think in this, where this comes up a lot is if you have maybe 2 dimensions and that combination of those 2 dimensions in the data, there wasn't any actual values for that combination, but the user still wants to see those headers. It's really hard to get Tableau to actually force to make those headers. So you have to get tricky with the, do some interesting joins or something in the back end to make that work.
There's tricky ways you can accomplish it for sure, but best practice is to stay away from that stuff. Especially, like I said, when we start getting into statistical analysis, a lot of times if we have holes within those observations, they'll get excluded from that analysis. So it's like we have it in the data, but they're not even being accounted for some of these advanced techniques. So, or we have to fill them in with some sort of logic. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, but there's use cases for everything out there.
There was another question, and I think this got answered to some extent, but you were going over, you showed a toggle. Do you have any resources for how to create toggles like that? David did respond with I think the latest Seattle tug, or a Seattle tug, in which they went through this topic exactly. But
yeah, there's a ton of resources out there. If you go to our Playfair blog, it has several really good resources on creating toggle buttons. So if you just search for toggle button within our Playfair blog, you'll be able to find those resources. And I believe you can even download those images so you can load them to your Tableau repository from our blog. So you don't even have to go to like Figma to create them. But as far as creating them yourself, a tool like Figma, you can just go in there, plug some stuff in and download that image.
Awesome. Thank you, Ethan. The last question is from me. And this isn't about your presentation necessarily, but the title you have is Associate Director of Analytics Engineering. And the term analytics engineer is kind of a newer concept to the data space. And I was kind of curious what that role means for you, because obviously it sounds like a mixture of data engineering maybe and an analyst or something like that. Just curious what that means for you at Playfair.
Analytics engineering is an open door. I mean, it really means everything and everything in between that too. So within my team, we really specialize in everything from visualizing the data to capturing it within the data engineering process, statistical analysis, doing analysis on the data itself. So every aspect of, getting the data, visualizing it, analyzing it, we kind of take care of all of that. So yeah, that's what it means at Playfair, I guess. Maybe
So
other places have different definitions of it.
Yeah, cool. So you see it as like a full stack data analyst or something like that, where
we kind of have specialty. Like myself, I would consider myself very advanced in visualizing analytics or data visualization within Tableau specifically. I also have a background in statistics. So I just graduated from KU Med with a statistics degree, master's degree. So that's statistical analysis. I'm very fluent in that. Data engineering, I've worked with it. I've done it in the past. I can't say that that's my core concept though, but there's other team members out there within my team that is their core concept. So it's really, kind of a full stack of analytics across the whole team.
Cool. Well, thank you. That's all the questions we had. So I appreciate both David and Ethan for joining us today. Everyone that stuck around a little later, I appreciate that as well. And
yes, also Wait, hold on. I just wanted to congratulate a few folks. We gave away some gift certificates on the slide, and it sounds like we might be doing this next session as well. So, log in. Congratulations to Will, Vanessa, and Samuel for being randomly chosen this round. So, yeah, right on, guys. Sorry, and we'll see you in June. And enjoy Tableau conference next week.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.